You build a bridge,
Yep.
right? And the math tells you it stands. You calculate the load-bearing capacity of the steel. You point to the blueprint, and you say, well, there it is. That's why it holds the weight.
Yeah, it's clean. It's predictable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's clean. But then tell me what makes a human face beautiful, or, why a specific painting brings people to tears, and suddenly that pristine math completely falls apart.
It shatters, honestly.
It really does. So for everyone listening, that is exactly what we're getting into today. We are taking a massive, exhaustive, deep dive into the philosophy and phenomenology of aesthetics. We're on a mission to deconstruct how humanity has defined, quantified, and manipulated beauty, literally from the Ice Age all the way to modern artificial intelligence.
And it is the ultimate diagnostic nightmare. Because when you attempt to quantify beauty, you aren't just evaluating the physical object in front of you.
Right.
You are inadvertently measuring the religious history, the environmental pressures, the economic status, and the deeply hidden biological biases of the person who is doing the looking.
Which is why we have to start at the bedrock. The word aesthetics, it gets thrown around constantly today.
Oh, absolutely. The aesthetic of a coffee shop, or like curating your social media aesthetic.
Right, but the origin of the word has absolutely nothing to do with art or fashion.
No, not at all.
It traces back to antiquity. Specifically, the ancient Greek word aesthetikos, which translates to of sense perception. It comes from the root aisestai, meaning to physically perceive or see.
Yeah, the Greeks were using it to describe the literal biological act of the nervous system interacting with reality.
Like the actual mechanics of it.
Exactly. How light hits the retina, how sound vibrates the eardrum. It was purely mechanical.
But it didn't become a formal branch of philosophy until centuries later. I was looking at the timeline in our sources, and everything pivots in 1735.
Yes. Baumgarten.
Right, the German philosopher Alexander Gottlieb Baumgarten. He officially coins the Latin term aesthetica, and he defines it as the scientific study of sensory cognition.
Which is a huge turning point.
But hold on, the scientific study of sensory cognition. Translate that for me, because if I'm, say, a first-year philosophy PhD student sitting in your lecture hall, how do you explain what Baumgarten actually did there?
Okay, think about human knowledge as a massive, sprawling university campus.
Okay, I'm with you.
Prior to 1735, the Logic Building was this towering, pristine skyscraper. The Ethics Building was a grand cathedral. But the senses, how we physically feel when we hear a beautiful piece of music or that bodily sensation of awe,
Where was that on campus?
that was treated like a chaotic, muddy swamp on the edge of campus. Philosophers considered it too messy, too bodily, and frankly, too irrational to study seriously.
So they just ignored it.
Mostly, yeah.
Yeah.
If they talked about beauty, it was only as a byproduct of divine goodness or geometry. But Baumgarten marches into that swamp, plants a flag, and basically says, we are going to build a laboratory right here.
I love that. So he's saying that feelings actually have their own logic.
Yeah, precisely. He argued that sensory knowledge, the data we absorb through our feelings and physical perceptions, possesses its own unique perfection. And the highest form of that sensory perfection is what we call beauty.
He elevated it.
He did. He elevated the body's physical sensations to the level of rigorous intellectual science.
But establishing that laboratory immediately exposes a massive, century-spanning epistemological debate. And this is the fundamental fault line of our entire deep dive today.
The big question.
Exactly. Is beauty an objective, measurable physical property out there in the world? Or is it a completely subjective internal experience localized entirely within the mind of the observer?
It's the classic tree falling in the woods scenario. If a perfectly sculpted statue is buried in the sand and no one is there to perceive it, is it still beautiful? Does beauty exist independently of human consciousness?
And how a society answers that specific question dictates how they construct, measure, and revere beauty. So let's look at the objective side first. If beauty is objective, how exactly do the ancients try to measure it?
Well, if the universe is math, then beauty is math. That was the starting point for the classical paradigm of Western antiquity, specifically Plato and Aristotle.
They didn't just write poetry, right? They literally pulled out the measuring tape.
Oh, absolutely. For them, beauty was an arrangement of integral parts assembled into a coherent, harmonious whole. Aristotle gets highly specific about this in his Metaphysics and his Poetics.
What were his criteria?
He posited that the primary forms of beauty are order and symmetry and definiteness.
Definiteness. Why the obsession with definiteness? Like, why couldn't a blurry, abstract, painting be beautiful to Aristotle?
Because of how the ancient Greeks viewed the cosmos. They didn't see the universe as a random explosion of cosmic dust. They viewed it as a deeply rational, mathematically ordered system.
Right.
The Greek word cosmos implies order and beautiful arrangement. It's actually where the modern word cosmetics originates.
Wait, really? Cosmetics comes from cosmos?
Yeah, because if the universe is fundamentally mathematical, then a beautiful object must be a local manifestation of that cosmic truth. If a building or a body lacks definiteness, if it's asymmetrical or chaotic, it represents the terrifying void of chaos.
That makes so much sense. And I was reading the notes on Polykleitos, a Greek sculptor from the 5th century BCE, and I honestly couldn't believe how obsessed this got.
Oh, Polykleitos was intense.
He creates a sculpture and a theoretical treatise, both titled The Canon. And he proposed that perfect beauty was entirely a matter of symmetria, the exact mathematical proportion of parts.
The Roman physician Galen documented this lost treatise, and Polykleitos wasn't just sketching things out by eye.
No, he was measuring the distal phalanx of the pinky finger, right?
Exactly. He dictated that the pinky bone determined the exact required length of the middle finger, which then dictated the width of the metacarpal bones, which dictated the circumference of the wrist.
Was he an artist or an engineer? Because that sounds like blueprints for a machine.
He was essentially engineering a god. I mean, imagine being an apprentice in a studio. You are absolutely not allowed to sculpt a hand based on what looks pleasing to your specific eye. You are executing a rigid mathematical blueprint.
Because society demanded it.
Right. The underlying belief was that human bodies, when perfected through mathematics, transcended human flaws and approached the divine.
And the math itself is mind-blowing, specifically their use of the golden ratio,
Okay.
which is approximately 1.618. This isn't just a Greek invention. It's like the underlying code of reality.
It really is everywhere in nature.
You see this exact mathematical proportion in the spiral of galaxies in the chambers of a nautilus shell. But it goes down to the microscopic level, too. I mean, the DNA double helix literally measures 34 angstroms long by 21 angstroms wide for each full cycle.
And those are both Fibonacci numbers.
Exactly. 34 and 21 are Fibonacci numbers, and their ratio is 1.619, which is astonishingly close to the golden ratio.
Mm.
But the ancients didn't have electron microscopes. How did they project this natural mathematical law onto their art?
They intuited the foundational rhythm of nature. Look at the architecture of the Parthenon in Athens.
Okay.
It's a classic example. Its facade was supposedly designed using the root 5 rectangle, which is a geometric shape intimately tied to the golden ratio. They were trying to carve marble and build structures that vibrated at the exact same mathematical frequency as the universe itself.
Okay, so that covers the classical math. But the objective side of this debate also includes what is called the idealist conception of beauty. This was pushed by later thinkers like Friedrich Schiller and Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel.
Right, the idealists. They kept the idea that beauty is objective, but they elevated it from pure math into something deeply metaphysical.
How so?
They viewed beauty as a spiritual bridge. Schiller, for instance, in the late 18th century, argued that beauty is what integrates the messy, sensuous world with the spiritual, rational realm.
He actually claimed beauty is a necessary condition of humanity, right?
Right.
Required to reach true freedom.
Yes. For Schiller, you cannot be a fully realized, free human being without engaging with beauty.
And then Hegel takes a massive swing and argues that artistic beauty, created by humans, is inherently superior to natural beauty. Which, to me, sounds incredibly arrogant.
It does sound bold.
Right. You look at a stunning sunset, and Hegel says a painting of a sunset is better. How does he justify that?
Well, Hegel argues that nature's unconscious. A sunset doesn't know it's beautiful, it's just atmospheric physics. A flower is just following biological programming.
Okay.
But when a human being takes a raw lump of clay or a blank canvas and infuses it with their consciousness, they are elevating that matter. They are forcing dead material to speak the language of the soul. Artistic beauty is, as he put it, born of the spirit and born again.
This connects back to the ancient philosopher Plotinus, who defined beauty through this concept of formedness. He argued that beauty originates when a shape is mastered by reason and the ideal form.
Plotinus is fascinating here.
But the way he proves this is so interesting. He proves it by defining the exact opposite, the absolute ugly. He defines it as an object that hasn't been entirely mastered by pattern, where matter fails to yield to the ideal form.
It's a very visceral philosophical image. Think of a sculptor trying to carve a delicate face out of a block of marble. But there is a hard, stubborn vein of quartz running right through it.
Oh, wow.
The sculptor's ideal form, the vision in his mind, is trying to master the stone, but the stone refuses to yield. For Plotinus, that resistance, that failure of matter to submit to the divine idea, is the essence of ugliness. Raw matter refusing to be elevated.
Okay, so here's my question. If beauty is just objective math or an objective spiritual form, why do our tastes change so much?
A very fair question.
Right. Why do I think a painting is gorgeous and you think it belongs in a dumpster? A painting that one generation worships ends up in a basement a century later. Enter the 18th century.
The century of taste, as George Dickey named it.
This is where the pendulum swings violently to the subjective side.
It's the great rebellion against objective math, beginning with British empiricists like John Locke. Locke makes a critical distinction that we need to unpack. He separates primary qualities from secondary qualities of objects.
Okay, let's break that down for the listener.
So a primary quality exists in the object regardless of observation. Things like solidity or physical extension. An apple is solid whether you are in the room or not.
But secondary qualities.
Secondary qualities are things like color, taste, sound, and critically, beauty. Locke argued these do not actually exist in the physical object. They are secondary phantasms of the mind, dependent entirely on the sensory response of the observer's nervous system.
So if you drop a red apple in a pitch-black room, it isn't really red anymore because redness requires light and a human retina to process it.
Exactly.
And David Hume takes this empiricism and writes the ultimate subjectivist manifesto. He declares that beauty and deformity are not qualities and objects, but belong entirely to the sentiment. The classic beauty is strictly in the eye of the beholder.
But Hume was brilliant, and he immediately recognized the danger of pure subjectivism. It's known as the antinomy of taste.
Because if everything is subjective, nothing matters.
Precisely. If my opinion that a literal trash can is beautiful is equally as valid as your opinion that the Sistine Chapel is beautiful, then the very concept of beauty loses all communicative value. It just becomes meaningless noise. Hume needed to establish a standard without relying on math.
And his solution is the consensus of ideal judges. And he lists 5 insanely strict traits these judges must possess: strong sense, delicate sentiment, improvement by practice, perfection by comparison, and total freedom from prejudice.
To quote the resume.
Wait, perfection by comparison. How does that actually work? If I've never seen a Renaissance painting, Hume is saying, my opinion on modern art is biologically invalid.
Hume would argue your opinion is uninformed, yeah. You lack the mental library necessary to contextualize the art. You cannot judge the greatness of a contemporary novel if you haven't read the classics to compare it against.
That feels very gatekeepy.
It is. And his final trait, total freedom from prejudice, requires you to leave your cultural baggage and personal biases entirely at the door. Hume admits very few people on Earth possess all 5 traits.
But when they do,
Right. When the few people who do possess them agree over centuries that something is beautiful, that consensus becomes our objective standard of taste.
this subjective turn hits its absolute peak with Immanuel Kant's 1790 work, Critique of Judgment. The absolute cornerstone of Kantian aesthetics is disinterestedness. And we have to be clear for the listener here. Disinterested doesn't mean bored.
Not at all. It's not about apathy. Kant argues that to truly experience pure beauty, you must separate the object from any practical, scientific, or personal desire. You cannot want to use the object. You must view it with completely detached, pure contemplation.
Think about the last time you went to an art museum. Did you just stand there appreciating the brush strokes like Kant wants? Or did you immediately think, well, this would look great in my living room? Or I need to take a selfie with this to post online?
Exactly. The third Earl of Shaftesbury from the Moralists gives a great explicit example of this.
Oh, the real estate one.
Right. If you look at a sweeping, beautiful valley, and your first thought is, oh, the soil looks fertile, I could plant crops here. Or, this is a great real estate opportunity, you are no longer experiencing beauty, you are evaluating utility.
And Shaftesbury uses an even sharper example regarding people.
He does. He says if you look at a beautiful person and your gaze is driven purely by viewing them as a sexual conquest, if your biology is screaming with reproductive interest, you are entirely distracted by personal desire.
So you aren't seeing beauty.
No, you might be experiencing lust or hunger, but you are absolutely not experiencing pure Kantian aesthetic beauty. True beauty requires severing the cord of personal interest.
So if I'm looking at a horse and I think that is a beautiful, strong horse that could pull a heavy cart, Kant would say I'm doing it wrong. He makes a hard distinction between dependent beauty and free beauty.
Yes. Dependent beauty is judging something based on what it is supposed to be. An ox that looks like a delicate racing horse would be an ugly ox because it fails its concept.
But the highest form is free beauty.
Or absolute beauty, yes. This is beauty found purely in form or design without reference to a practical purpose. Abstract lines, a sunset, a seashell. You aren't judging what the seashell is supposed to do, you are just mesmerized by the form. Clive Bell later championed this idea in 1914 with abstract art.
A very cold, highly intellectual way of viewing the world. Kant puts beauty behind a pane of glass. But philosophy demands we stare at beauty coldly, while my biology is screaming something completely different. When most of us experience something beautiful, it doesn't feel cold. It feels like intense desire.
And there is a rich philosophical tradition opposing Kant on exactly that point. Plato, Plotinus, Edmund Burke, they explicitly connected beauty to human love and desire.
Plotinus doesn't describe cold analysis at all. He describes encountering beauty as a phenomenological state characterized by wonderment and a delicious trouble, longing and love and a trembling that is all delight.
A delicious trouble.
That perfectly captures the overwhelming feeling of an aesthetic experience. And contemporary philosopher Alexander Nehamas argues forcefully against Kant, saying beauty actually quickens our sense of life. It directs our attention and sparks a passionate engagement. We aren't disinterested at all.
Which brings us to the ultimate pragmatic counterpoint. Kant says beauty requires us to be disinterested, but modern evolutionary biology kicks down the door and says, no, Kant is entirely wrong. We are fiercely biologically, genetically interested.
The biological algorithm, the visual characteristics humans universally find appealing, are not lofty cultural constructs. They are reliable biomarkers of reproductive fitness and developmental stability, built for harsh ancestral environments.
The reptilian brain looks at someone and screams, oh, they're beautiful. But what it's actually calculating is this organism has a low parasite load and a robust endocrine system.
It really ruins the romance, doesn't it?
It reduces us to survival machines, yeah.
Let's look at the most heavily researched biomarker, bilateral symmetry. Why are symmetrical faces perceived cross-culturally as more beautiful?
It comes down to what biologists call developmental stability. In the womb, the genetic blueprint calls for perfect symmetry. But the real world is full of stressors, genetic mutations, viral infections, malnutrition.
And those stressors leave a mark.
Exactly. If an organism is weak, those stressors knock development off course, resulting in subtle physical asymmetries. Physical symmetry serves as a visual indicator that an organism's genes were strong enough to withstand the chaos of the environment.
And this preference actually predates humanity. Like macaque monkeys will gaze significantly longer at symmetrical faces of other conspecific macaques.
It's deeply ingrained.
And it's cross-cultural. Researchers found that isolated African hunter-gatherer populations exhibit the exact same preferences for symmetrical faces as college students in New York. Medical examinations even find correlations between facial symmetry and objective health metrics like intelligence. But it gets weirder. Averageness. In daily life, average means boring, but in biology, it's a massive predictor of attractiveness. I have to clarify for the listener, average here doesn't mean ordinary, it means a mathematical mean. How does averageness work?
Averageness is linked to genetic heterozygosity, which essentially means genetic diversity. If your parents came from very different gene pools, you have a broader arsenal of antibodies to fight off pathogens.
Okay, so it's immune strength.
Right. And visually, genetic diversity tends to smooth out extreme physical anomalies, regressing the face toward the mathematical center of a population.
The computer blending research proves this perfectly. If you blend 30 human faces together on a computer, the algorithm smooths out the micro-imperfections. The resulting composite is consistently rated as vastly more attractive than any of the individual faces used to make it.
The effect size is massive, a D of 1.45 in statistical terms.
Which surpasses even the symmetry effect. Our brains love the mathematical average because it signals immune strength. Moving down the body, we have to talk about sexual dimorphism and fertility markers, specifically the waist-to-hip ratio, or WHR.
This is tied to the endocrine system and estrogen distribution.
Right. For decades, evolutionary psychologists theorized that the gynoid, or hourglass body shape, was a flawless visual proxy for reproductive capability.
But we have to be extremely careful here. As rigorous academics, we have to critique this. Recent massive meta-analyses have heavily challenged the strength of the WHR link.
So it's not a flawless predictor.
No. While feminine morphological traits like a lower WHR and specific Singer bone lengths, like the 2D.40 digit ratio relating to fetal testosterone, are definitely preferred visually by observers, the current clinical evidence base is too weak to conclusively prove they are flawless predictors of actual fertility.
So the visual heuristic might be an evolutionary mirage.
Or at least highly exaggerated by modern researchers. We also see this with skin coloration. Carotenoid pigmentation, which gives skin a healthy glow, is used as a heuristic for vitality. But again, it's a proxy, not a guarantee.
So biology gives us the raw, universal algorithm, symmetry, averageness, clear skin. But culture is the software that manipulates it. Let's look at how history morphed these biological baselines. Because if biology is the hardware, why did Ice Age humans sculpt something completely different from ancient Egyptians?
Because prehistoric pragmatism completely overrides biological baselines depending on what a society needs to survive. Look at the Venus figurines from the European Ice Age.
Right, like the Venus of Willendorf or Dolny Vestinice and Lilsbug. These are 25,000 to 30,000 years old.
The Venus of Willendorf features extreme accumulations of body fat, heavy breasts, a swollen stomach, and an almost total absence of facial detail. It completely contradicts modern media ideals.
Why ignore the face entirely?
Because the aesthetic priority wasn't facial symmetry, it was brute survival. The world is covered in ice. Starvation is a daily threat. In that environment, extreme corpulence is literally stored energy.
It's life.
It is the ability to sustain a pregnancy through a brutal, freezing winter. These figurines are symbolic religious totems of fertility and resilience. The body was an homage to survival in a starving world.
Fast forward 20 millennia to the Egyptian New Kingdom, circa 1350 BCE, and the aesthetic standards suffer severe whiplash. We go from survivalist bulk to delicate, slim bodies, shaved heads, kohl makeup, and pleated skirts.
Well, Egypt was an agricultural powerhouse. Starvation wasn't the elite's primary threat. Maintaining divine order and hygienic purity was. Cleanliness and geometry became paramount.
The absolute paramount archetype here is the bust of Queen Nefertiti, crafted by Thutmose in 1345 BC. This thing is 48 centimeters tall, weighs 20 kilograms, and modern science has exhaustively analyzed its mathematics.
The math is stunning.
The ratio of her upper lip to her lower lip per million sits precisely at 1.1.6, perfectly mirroring the golden ratio. Her nasal proportion is 1.1.56. The literature states her facial structure seamlessly aligns with the modern Marquardt beauty mask.
Yes, the golden decagon.
Hold on, what is a golden decagon? If I were to overlay that on someone's face right now, what does that actually look like?
The Marquardt beauty mask is a complex, mathematically derived geometric grid created by a modern oral and maxillofacial surgeon. It uses interlocking decagons, 10-sided polygons, whose sides relate to each other via the golden ratio.
Oh, wow.
If you overlay this grid on a face, it dictates exactly where the cheekbones should peak, how wide the nose should be relative to the mouth, and the exact arch of the eyebrow. Thutmose, the ancient sculptor, essentially nailed this modern algorithmic grid over 3,000 years ago.
But the bust is perfectly bilaterally symmetrical, which isn't natural for a human face.
Exactly. Art historians theorize the Nefertiti bust was never meant for public display. It was found abandoned in Thutmose's workshop.
Wait, really?
Yeah. The theory is that it was a three-dimensional prototype, a master template used to teach apprentices how to carve the queen. Because it was an educational tool, it was intentionally stripped of the natural, asymmetrical imperfections of a living human. Nefertiti the human probably didn't look exactly like this. It's a mathematical rendering of power.
Contrast that rigid Egyptian math with the Greco-Roman ideal. The Venus de Milo, carved around the 2nd century BCE, has softer, fuller forms. But her genius is in her flaws. She contains deliberate facial asymmetries.
The blank space of perfection.
Her nose is deviated, her ears are uneven, and one eye is positioned slightly higher. Why would a Greek sculptor, obsessed with divine order, intentionally make the goddess of beauty asymmetrical?
Because they possessed advanced visual perception, they understood optical illusion. If you carve a face perfectly symmetrically, like a flat architectural drawing, it actually looks distorted and lifeless when viewed from below or walking around it.
Foreshortening distorts the math.
Precisely. Placing one eye slightly higher compensates for the viewer's parallax error. The asymmetry creates the illusion of perfect, breathing, kinetic balance from multiple angles.
While Greek sculptors played with optical illusions in stone, literature played with the imagination. Helen of Troy is the ultimate archetype. But Homer and Virgil don't give you a detailed description of her face. They use what's called the blank space of non-representation.
It is brilliant literary restraint.
They describe her shimmering garments, her hyacinthine curls, but leave her face physically blank. Why?
If Homer dictates the exact length of her nose, a reader might disagree with that specific aesthetic. By leaving her blank, Homer forces every audience member to project their own deeply personal, ultimate ideal of beauty onto the character.
But there is a massive sociopolitical paradox with Helen. She is the ultimate object of desire Eros, who is simultaneously a civilization-destroying, bewitching force.
It reflects deep patriarchal anxieties.
This narrative positions female beauty as a dangerous force that destabilizes male rationality. She ruins the world just by existing.
Right.
We've looked at the West, but let's transition to how other classical societies codified beauty in words and stone. Because if the Greeks proved beauty is a universal mathematical illusion, then human biology should dictate everyone carve the same statues. But they didn't.
No, they certainly did not.
Look at ancient India. The animist cultures looked at the exact same human body and sculpted something completely different.
Because Indian aesthetics were intrinsically tied to spiritual cosmology and the natural world. Look at the Yakshi sculptures from the 1st century BCE, like the Didarganj Yakshi.
They are completely different from cold Greek marble.
Entirely. These were semi-divine earth spirits associated with the worship of trees and rivers. They are depicted with burly, swelling volumes, narrow waists, but intensely voluptuous hips and breasts, wearing a diaphanous dhoti skirt.
They radiate groundedness. They look rooted in the soil.
They reflect a society worshipping nature's sheer abundance. As Buddhism and Jainism evolved, they had to absorb these animist cults. So the powerful Yakshi deities transitioned into decorative Shalabanjika motif structural brackets on Buddhist stupas.
So it's an aesthetic compromise, taming the raw earth spirit into architectural decoration.
Exactly. And in classical Sanskrit literature, we find an archetype completely opposite to Helen of Troy, Shakuntala from Kalidasa's epic play.
Helen's beauty destroys civilization, but Shakuntala's beauty embodies harmonious innocence. Kalidasa utilizes her character to evoke the Sringara rasa. I need a translation on that because the text calls it the aesthetic flavor of romantic love. How does that functionally differ from Western romantic tropes?
Well, Western romance often focuses on the conquest or the isolated, chaotic passion between two individuals. The Sringara rasa, specifically as embodied by Shakuntala, is a dignified, holistic, romantic love that is inextricably intertwined with the cosmos.
Her physical allure elevates her moral dignity.
Right. Her beauty is inseparable from her moral purity. The imagery is breathtaking. When she leaves the forest hermitage, the entire forest weeps. The deer drop grass from their mouths. The peacocks stop dancing. The Vanajotsana creeper plant mourns.
Ching Dushanta is captivated because her beauty is a radiation of her inner virtue, validated by nature itself.
Now contrast that organic beauty with the highly rigid, codified rhetoric of medieval and Renaissance poetics in Europe. If you were a poet in the Middle Ages trying to describe a beautiful woman, you literally followed a strict instruction manual.
Geoffrey of Vinsauf's Poetria Nova. I read this checklist and it sounds utterly alien.
Is highly codified rhetoric.
The forehead must bloom with lilies, the eyebrows must look like black whortleberries, and the space between them must be intersected by a Milky Way. A Milky Way on the forehead. What does that even mean?
It means luminous and white, but yes, it's extreme.
The eyes are emerald twin sentinels. The mouth is a half circle. The breath smells of frankincense. The throat is crystalline. And the breasts are virginal gems. It completely ignores biological reality to turn the woman into a walking, radioactive jewelry box of divine light.
It proves how deeply literature influences perception. For centuries, European Romance literature was dominated by this hyperluminous, impossible checklist. It assumed a white, glowing baseline.
We've looked at the West and India, but what happens with the human body itself becomes the canvas, sometimes prioritizing endurance and ritual over biology entirely. Let's travel to Japan's Heian period, from 794 to 1185 CE, inside the closed imperial court in Kyoto.
The Heian aesthetic is a masterclass in artificiality and burden. Beauty had nothing to do with evolutionary fitness here.
The natural body was just raw material.
Exactly. It was heavily obscured to demonstrate poetic sensitivity and adherence to complex social rituals. Women practiced hikamayu, shaving off their natural eyebrows and painting smudged, thick ones high on their foreheads.
And ohaguro.
Yes, blackening their teeth using iron filings and tannin. The gleaming black smile was considered aristocratic and civilized, contrasting sharply with white powdered skin.
And the fashion, the junihito, the 12-layer silk robes weighing up to 45 pounds. Why immobilize yourself?
They essentially invented the concept of high fashion as a barrier to entry. If you could afford to immobilize yourself in 45 pounds of silk, you were signaling that you were too rich to do manual labor.
It physically enforced a life of extreme leisure, but Heian beauty was also deeply intellectual, right?
Yeah.
The epitome is the Rokusen poet Ono no Komachi.
Yes, her appeal was a synthesis of her visual presentation and her profound intellectual melancholy. Her poetry expressed the philosophy of mono no aware.
Unpack mono no aware for us in this context.
It translates to the pathos of things, the gentle, melancholic sadness at the transience of beauty. Her poems compare her fading beauty to fading cherry blossoms.
Oh, it's tragic.
Very. Japanese Buddhist folklore often depicts her not as a young beauty, but as an old, destitute woman wandering in rags. In the Heian court, to be truly beautiful, you had to intellectually possess the sorrowful understanding that your beauty was doomed to vanish. Visual presentation was nothing without intellectual melancholy.
Contrast that cloistered court with pre-colonial Africa, where aesthetics were intensely localized and communication-based. The body was literally a text.
Absolutely. Compare the Maasai in East Africa with the Yoruba in West Africa. The Maasai favored a bold, geometric aesthetic. Women shaved their heads completely smooth, contrasting their dark skin with stark white chalk paint and brightly colored beadwork. The bald head provided a clean, geometric canvas.
But the Yoruba culture flipped that priority entirely.
Right. The Yoruba viewed hair as a critical sculptural medium. Women spent days architecturally sculpting their hair into towering forms using coral and metals. Thick, elaborate hair symbolized fertility, wealth, and specific social rank.
And the body as a text goes deeper with skin scarification.
Yes. Young women received raised scars in specific geometric patterns, identifying their family lineage. The literature points out that this practice required dark skin as the necessary visual foundation. The indigenous aesthetic assumed dark skin as the baseline beautiful state, enhanced by the textural play of light on raised scars.
And they entirely rejected the Western ideal of thinness. In Igbo culture, brides entered fattening rooms.
For weeks before the wedding, the bride was shielded from physical labor and fed richly to emerge larger, with softer skin. To a modern Westerner steeped in diet culture, this sounds like a health risk. But in the Igbo context, a plump bride visually communicated an economic reality. She proved her family's wealth, agricultural success, and her readiness to bear children. Reframing plumpness not as a health risk, but as a visual celebration of abundance and family wealth.
Let's bring this back to Europe, where the Industrial Revolution is about to cause a massive aesthetic whiplash. If we rapidly guide through the eras, the Middle Ages associated female beauty with the biblical Eve and sin, forcing women to apply toxic white lead makeup to look dangerously pale.
And the Renaissance embraced voluptuous ideals like Botticelli or Cranach the Elder's unsexed sensuousness.
The Baroque period pushed stout figures like Jourdain's paintings, and then the Rococo and Victorian eras snapped back to brutal, bone-deforming corsetry, like Empress Sissi of Austria enforcing a tiny waistline.
This constant pendulum swing reaches a breaking point in the 1870s and 80s with the aesthetic movement in Britain. The Industrial Revolution had transformed society into a factory of capitalist, highly restrictive, Victorian utilitarian morality. Everything had to have a moral or financial use. The aesthetic movement rebelled against this crass materialism.
Their doctrine was art for art's sake.
Exactly. Thinkers like Walter Pater championed an austere Epicureanism, and Oscar Wilde argued art should be divorced from ethical instruction. You see this in Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray, where the Yellow Book intoxicates Dorian purely with the cadence of its sentences, not its morality.
Or Whistler's Peacock Room. Just beauty for beauty. And in the realm of feminine beauty, this movement found its ultimate muse in Jane Morris.
Jane Morris is fascinating. She was a working-class embroiderer who became the primary model for Dante Gabriel Rossetti. She physically embodied the pre-Raphaelite rebellion.
Because she defied the cheerful Victorian angel archetype.
Right. She possessed a somber, melancholic beauty, a strong, heavy jawline, thick, unruly brows, and a brooding expression. Look at Rossetti's 1872 painting, Veronica Veronese.
I was looking at that. She is swathed in unstructured green velvet, absent-mindedly touching a violin while a canary sings.
There's no moral narrative there. It's an exercise in synesthesia. You imagine the tactile softness of the velvet and the sound of the bird. Her loose, uncorseted artistic dress proved that aesthetics was an integrated lifestyle choice, aligning with arts and crafts' socialist utopian ideals.
Painting defined the 19th century, but the silver screen defined the 20th. Cinema democratized beauty standards globally, but it also subjected the human form to rapid market forces.
After World War I, the Victorian silhouette was dismantled. We see the rise of the 1920s flapper. Coco Chanel, boyish frames, bound chests.
The bust-to-waist ratio dropped 60%, which tragically triggered the first documented eating disorder epidemic.
Yes, this evolves into the cinematic archetype of the gamine, epitomized by Audrey Hepburn. The gamine is waif-like, with a large head relative to body size and massive doe eyes. These neotenous traits projected an aura of approachable aristocratic safety.
But in stark contrast, the post-WWII era birthed the siren, epitomized by Marilyn Monroe.
American culture became consumer-driven. Monroe's aesthetic was a deliberate revival of extreme sexual dimorphism, the exaggerated hourglass.
But it was intensely performative. Norma Jean Baker engineered the bombshell persona down to a science.
She did. She manipulated her vocal fry, her oscillating gait. She wielded this highly constructed aesthetic as an instrument of global celebrity, despite possessing a genius-level IQ of 168.
It's the paradox of manipulating the male gaze while despairing over genuine connection. But the 20th century wasn't just white Hollywood archetypes. Women of color utilized aesthetics to subvert the colonial gaze and shatter global paradigms. Take Josephine Baker in Paris in the 1920s.
Baker is an icon. At the Revue Negre, she embraced Art Deco and androgynous tuxedos. The philosopher Gilles Deleuze called her a dancing machine. It was early Afrofuturism, reclaiming the body from colonial stereotypes.
We also have Anna May Wong fighting the incredibly discriminatory yellow face and dragon lady tropes.
In the 1932 film Shanghai Express, she utilized her profound visual agency and aesthetic dignity to humanize Chinese Americans and dismiss Western notions of otherness.
And in India, Maharani Gayatri Devi redefined post-colonial Indian royalty through minimalism.
She rejected heavy ornamentation for a pastel chiffon saris and a short haircut. She used color theory, pairing emeralds with pink saris. Her aesthetic directly mirrored her political agency, fighting Purdah and breaking Guinness records.
We've seen beauty as power. But starting in the 1980s, philosophers started arguing that beauty is actually a sophisticated form of oppression. Enter the feminist critiques.
Legal scholar Catherine McKinnon introduced visual thingification. She argued that the pervasive male gaze constructs women purely as objects for pleasure.
And film theorist Laura Mulvey applied this to cinema, identifying scopophilia, the sexualized pleasure of looking.
Yes. Naomi Wolf generalized this in her critique, The Beauty Myth, linking beauty directly to self-destructive loss of agency, and French philosopher Luce Irigaray noted that female beauty is perceived merely as finery, a superficial wrapping paper.
These critiques expand to race and colonialism. Marcus Garvey viewed white aesthetics as a deep psychological dimension of oppression, leading to self-alienation and colorism.
But artists fought back. Orland and Hannah Wilke, along with the disability arts movement, reclaimed beauty to make women subjects rather than objects.
Take that economic pressure and apply it to the labor market. We have to talk about pretty privilege and aesthetic labor. The economic data is staggering. The beauty premium is about 15%.
It's the halo effect. Your brain sees a symmetrical face and assumes the person is smart and reliable. Interestingly, the beauty pay gap is initially larger for men, while women see the effects compound later in their careers.
Which leads to aesthetic labor. Servers covering tattoos, restaurants, Japan's high heel mandates. Yet only Michigan has explicitly outlawed appearance discrimination. What happens when these intense socioeconomic pressures meet globalized social media algorithms?
We arrive at the digital convergence and the Instagram face, a concept by Gia Tolentino.
Poreless, plump cheekbones, cat-like eyes, distinctly white but ambiguously ethnic. It's a cyborgian convergence.
The homogenization of culture into a blank slate. And it has economic impacts. The Red Note study of 43,000 posts showed users in less affluent areas make more drastic edits for baby-faced features to signal wealth.
The filter is an economic mask. It drives a clinical pipeline to elective surgeries like buccal fat removal and blepharoplasty. And artificial intelligence amplifies this. AI faces score 7.79 versus human faces at 6.88.
AI amplifies evolutionary averageness and symmetry to genetically impossible extremes. Contrast this with the Venus de Milo or Audrey Hepburn algorithms, strip away the very imperfections that create unique human character.
The ethical danger is human beauty becoming a commodified, mathematically optimized product. We've synthesized a massive 60-minute journey today. From the biological imperatives of symmetry, the math of Nefertiti, the sensory checklist to the Middle Ages, to the political rebellions of Josephine Baker and the aesthetic labor of the modern economy.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We really have. Which brings me to a final provocative thought for you to take with you. As artificial intelligence successfully perfects the average and floods our feeds with flawless, impossible symmetry, will our algorithmic perfection become cheap? In the future, will genuine human flaws, asymmetry, and visible aging become the ultimate, unattainable luxury?
When perfection is infinite, the flaw becomes the masterpiece.
Thank you for joining us on this expansive deep dive into these sources. Until next time.